And Mr Lynch went on to say that he was hoping for coordinated action from other unions as well during the summer here in the United Kingdom. Pat McFadden is with us now. Hello to you, Mr McFadden. Is that something that Labour would support?
No, it's not. We very much regret that it's come to this strike. It will cause enormous inconvenience to the public, as you've been reporting on your programme today. We've got this strike today, others scheduled later in the week, and perhaps the bigger threat of ongoing industrial disputes through the summer. No one wants to see this. We want to see this brought to an end as quickly as possible, with a deal that allows the railways to work and the travelling public to get to work and all the other uses that people make of the railway system.
Yeah, but my question is, would Labour support coordinated action by other unions to support the RMT and also to further their cause?
No, I answered. We don't want to see that. We want to see these things settled by negotiation. Look, we understand why people are pressing for pay rises. It's only a few months since the Prime Minister stood up at the Tory conference and said that he supported a high-wage economy, that we were breaking with the old model of a low-wage economy. And now we've got inflation touching 10%. So we understand why people are pressing for pay rises. But it's far better for these things to be resolved in a proper way, in a negotiation, rather than the huge inconvenience to the public that's going to be caused by this dispute today. OK, just let me ask you one more time. Would Labour support coordinated action by other unions? No, we don't want to see lots of industrial disputes. We want these things to be resolved by negotiation. I hope I've been clear on that, Kay, for the third time.
OK. Let me ask you about a shadow minister on a picket line this morning. Is that something that you would do?
It's not something I'll be doing today. What I'll be doing today is using every opportunity that I can to urge a negotiated settlement. I don't want to see the government use this strike as some kind of divisive wedge issue of the week. I think the public deserves better than that, given the inconvenience that they're going through today, and also given the prospect of further industrial action in other sectors. Ministers can't stand back and view this as a political opportunity. Instead, they have to view it as a responsibility, particularly given the Prime Minister's pledge for a high-wage economy that he made just a few months ago.
A shadow minister on the picket line. Is it something you support if it's not something that you would do?
No, I don't think that's the way that this will be resolved. I think it will be resolved by the union, the employers, and hopefully the government being involved in reaching a deal that allows the railways to resume operation. And that's what I want to see as quickly as possible.
Do you expect her to be disciplined by the leader, given that apparently he had emailed to say that people shouldn't, your members should, the shadow cabinet should, and shadow ministers should not be taking part in this industrial action by supporting people on the picket line?
Well, that's a matter for the whips and for Keir Starmer. It's not something I would be involved in.
OK. Chatting to both sides of the dispute today. When I say both sides, I mean the government and the union, and both pretty incalcitrant. Neither looks as though they are going to be getting around the table again anytime soon. In fact, we heard from the government in the form of Grant Shapps, and he was saying it would actually make matters worse if he got involved.
Yeah, I heard him say that, and I think that maybe what's changed from the past is the attitude of government overall to this. You know, we've had a lot of talk in recent days about the 1970s, and there are echoes of this. We're having to wait a lot longer for things. We're having to wait for passports, for driving licenses, for GP appointments. People are waiting longer at the airport and so on. Now you've got these industrial disputes. It seems like we've got a government that's losing its grip issue by issue. That's what's different to the recent past. Things that we used to take for granted are taking so much longer, and the government seems to have no idea how to fix these problems. We're living in very much a backlog Britain right now, and we've got to get back to having a government with a grip that's able to sort these things out.
Yeah, to be fair, the winter of discontent was a Labour government.
40 years ago it was, and we paid a very big political price about that. And if I could act as an advisor to the government right now, they might not want my advice. But if they want to learn from that, they might learn that standing back and watching this unfold and not trying to get a grip of it may not end happily for them. Because whoever is responsible for this dispute is certainly not the party that's been in opposition for the last 12 years.
So Grant Shapps said it's not his job to get involved with the negotiations. Why is he wrong?
I just don't think that will hold if we've got the prospect not just of several strikes this week on the railways, but possibly that railway strike spinning on into the summer and disputes in other areas too. Is he going to appear, or he and fellow ministers going to appear on your programme for weeks on end saying it's nothing to do with us? I think we need a government again, not just a permanent political campaign that sees every issue that comes along as an opportunity to divide people. And sadly, that's been the approach to this dispute and the approach to so many issues which are arising week to week right now.
How concerned are you that we are heading towards a summer of discontent?
I think it's worrying. If you look at the newspapers this morning, you see that, of course, the railways are front and centre of what we're talking about, but they're not the only issue where there are pay pressures. Those pay pressures are understandable given the inflation figures. Of course, people are going to try to campaign for a decent pay rise. But what we don't want to see is a summer of discontent, a series of industrial disputes that will be bad for the public. I want to see these things properly resolved through collective bargaining, through negotiation, through the mechanisms that are there. That's going to be best for the country rather than this dispute today being replicated in other sectors.
But what else can the government do? You know, they can't, according to the Governor of the Bank of England, they cannot put in place inflation-busting pay rises because otherwise we will continue to spiral as far as our inflation issues are concerned. Do you have at least some sympathy for the government?
Look, I understand the position, but we've got a short-term problem and a long-term problem as usual. The short-term problem is resolving these disputes and helping people with the cost of living crisis right now. But this didn't happen overnight. The reason that we've got such pay pressure is because we've had a decade of stagnating pay. And the reason we've had a decade of stagnating pay is we've had very poor economic growth in this country for the last 10 years. Let me give you an example. If we'd continued with the kind of economic growth and the growth in pay that we had in the first decade of this century, when my party were in power, wages would be on average £11,000 a year higher right now. That would be an entirely different set of circumstances. So the reason that pay is under such pressure at the moment is because of the long economic record of poor growth that we've seen under the Conservatives. So I don't just want to see a resolution to this dispute. I want to see us get better economic growth in the future so that the country becomes more prosperous and so do people at work.
Yeah, but this government had a pandemic to contend with, and we are where we are. You give me the figure of £11,000 a year better off, but nevertheless, we are where we are. What can the government do? If they start to bust inflation with pay rises, public sector pay rises, then it's just going to continue on and on and on, is what the government says.
Well, as I say, they've got to do two things. They've got to do everything they can to strain every sinew to get help to people through this short-term period, we hope, of the cost of living crisis. But the long term does matter, Kay. If we don't get better economic growth in the future than we've had in the past 10 years, then we are going to be locked in a cycle of people being unable to pay their bills, upward pressure on taxes. It all comes back to economic growth. So this does matter in the long term. And I see no long-term plan for the kind of challenges that the country is facing. And that's one of the reasons why the government lurches from issue to issue, chaos to chaos, with no plan other than asking themselves, How can we use this to divide people? How can we use this as a wedge issue? It's really not good enough. So they've got to do things in the short term to resolve these disputes and help people with the cost of living crisis. And we've got to get better economic growth in the future.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.